everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of In the Cup. We're going to be doing something a little different this week. As our viewers know, we're mostly a golf and lifestyle podcast, but we cover stories from all across sports, pop culture. But one of our goals is to amplify women's stories, especially women in sports. So we're very excited to welcome Gina Prodan Kelly, Chief Marketing Officer and women's team co-founder of Cleveland Pro Soccer. She and her team have been working very hard over the past few years to bring a women's and men's professional soccer team to the city of Cleveland. And she's also been very involved in the start of the WPSL Pro League, which is set to launch in 2027. So welcome, Gina. We're very happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. And just a quick note, we will be pushing it back to 2028 for
Oh,
good
okay.
reasons, though. But this is our announcement.
Yeah. It's all part of the process, right?
Right.
Well,
Yes.
before we get into the business of soccer, can you tell us a little bit about your personal story with soccer? You know, in the United States, soccer hasn't always been a mainstream sport. To the rest of the world, it is the sport. But can you tell us a little bit about your connection to soccer?
I grew up, my parents are Croatian immigrants. So I grew up with soccer as a central part of my life. I didn't actually play on a team until I was 14, but had played, just in the street, in yards, just out the way most of the world plays soccer, and played through high school and college. And like a lot of people, as you get into work, get a little removed from your athletic activities. And then a few years ago started a pickup league, and started playing again. But I've always been a fan of soccer, and I grew up in Cleveland. I know you're not in Cleveland, but we grew up with a really great soccer culture locally, and we actually have one of the winningest indoor professional soccer teams called the Cleveland
Oh, wow.
Crunch here. And so that was what we grew up with filled arenas and championships, and soccer being part of what we knew Cleveland to be. So between my family, my own playing, and the world around me, I feel like soccer was always part of what everyday life was. And then I had two kids. I have two sons who play, and now it is absolutely everything I'm tripping over where I drive on the weekends. So
It's your life.
it is my life, and it's such a fun culture to watch grow. I'm so proud of what we've been able to grow here locally, but what we're seeing around the United States too.
How did you get involved with Cleveland Pro Soccer? You've been with them for a few years now, right? And you obviously had the marketing background. So how did you end up kind of marrying the love for soccer and the love of marketing together?
In 2022, Michael Murphy and Nolan Gallagher founded Cleveland Soccer Group. At that time, they announced that they had secured rights to a men's professional soccer team, but at the same time, they were pursuing a women's professional soccer team. In October of 2023, they announced a very public campaign for an NWSL team. If you're not familiar with soccer, or at least the US soccer system, NWSL is at the top of the US soccer pyramid on the women's side. It's the equivalent of MLS on the men's side. So that campaign launched, and I was so proud that someone was saying Cleveland deserves this. Cleveland, should have a women's professional soccer team, that we should bring women's professional sports back to Cleveland. So Cleveland is a really lovely place to be, and it's really well connected. So I networked around and was able to find people who knew the guys, and had a lovely breakfast with Nolan, and talked to him about how they would get to 10,000 season ticket deposits, and what markets or what segments they needed to approach in this market, and how to reach them. That whole effort was huge, because we got national headlines for how much momentum we were building. We ended up in the final three for that expansion bid, and we ended up with 16,000 season ticket deposits for a
Oh, wow.
team that didn't exist in a stadium we hadn't built yet. And we're really proud of that effort. And I was lucky enough to be part of the group that put the bid together, presented it, and also hosted the league in Cleveland for a site visit. Ultimately, that bid went to Denver.
Mhm.
And while it was really hard when that happened, I think it actually put in motion a number of things that I think are where I'm supposed to be.
Well, you mentioned that Cleveland is a very big soccer community. There's a big soccer culture there. And you probably think that everyone is behind in bringing a team. So why for Michael and Nolan, for you, why was now the time? Like, why would it work now in Cleveland?
So I think one of the challenges that we've had, we aren't the first to try to get professional soccer in Cleveland. In fact, there was a professional men's team a few years ago, but we didn't have the infrastructure. We don't have a soccer stadium that is, we do have a soccer stadium at Cleveland State University, but it isn't a professional grade stadium. So otherwise we don't have the right venue. So there not only isn't a place to successfully host a soccer team, a professional soccer team in Cleveland, especially downtown
Mhm.
Cleveland where we have all of our sports venues. It's a gap in the inventory for the entire city in terms of bringing the certain size of sports events and championships and all kinds of sporting activities to the city. While we're not the first to get to secure teams or even pursue it, I think we will be. Knock on wood, the first to be able to build a soccer stadium in downtown Cleveland, and that I mean that is absolutely the biggest obstacle that that we've had to deal with along the way. And I think it was one of the things that counted against our bid when we went for NWSL. We had stadium plan. We have
Mhm.
really great stadium plan that what we pitched to them during a time when there was a lot of stadium drama locally and in the
Mhm.
NWSL. So I think that not having it hurt us then will help us in the future. And I think will open up a lot of doors for what we want to do with soccer in the future.
Well, Cleveland in general is a big sports city. The state of Ohio is a big sports state, very loyal fans. How do you see the women's soccer team kind of fitting into that ecosystem?
So I think while we surprised a lot of people, I had a lovely conversation with a New York Times, The Athletic reporter when we announced our WPSL Pro team. They said that with our NWSL bid, that 16,000 season ticket deposits, that put us on their radar. That they
Mhm.
hadn't. They had always thought of Cleveland as a sports town, but didn't consider us a women's sports market, and it changed a lot of minds. And I think put us in great position for even landing the WNBA team. I think that when you're here you see people out for when people show up for US women's national team when they played in town, or
Mhm.
showing up for amateur teams, you see the community already rallying around women's sports. So I think that
Mhm.
we'll continue to see that grow. In fact, during our campaign we hosted watch parties for WNBA and NWSL uh, at a local shop called Brunette's, a bar with donuts.
Oh,
Amazing, amazing place.
great concept.
And we would bust the fire code every time. The owner of that of Brunette's, alongside the owners of a coffee shop, ended up starting a women's sports bar actually down the street from Brunette's, and they've consistently drawn great business from people who want to get together and be part of this. I always say it's like this isn't a moment. They want to be part of this momentum. They want to be part of this
Mhm.
movement of not just watching or saying you love women's sports, but showing up,
Mhm.
bringing more people with you, and growing more excitement around it.
Well, you mentioned it's not a moment, but this weekend, NWSL, apologies, had its opener for this season. And I was reading that, the Boston Legacy team broke records with their season opener. I think Denver is going to do the same with their home opener. How does that momentum in terms of Cleveland, you mentioned the WNBA team, how does that kind of help you guys out in terms of marketing and drawing more fans and just, seeing what's going on outside of Cleveland in the world of women's soccer in general?
So when we see news breaking that the people are showing up to games, when we see more games on TV, we have more people able to and more likely to actually lay their eyes on women playing soccer or any sport. And there's really great data and research available about how much that impacts people's likelihood to not only watch again but become a fan. It's something like when you watch women's sports, you're three times more likely to watch again, and then three times more likely to become a fan. And I think one of the reasons why is because you get to see factually what, excellence looks like. It's not what somebody else told you or what you imagined it would be. These are really great world class athletes
Hmm.
playing the sport that they love. When we see headlines about, again, people showing up, it takes down the excuses, the
Hmm.
barriers, anything in people's heads about why they aren't watching. And the next time they flip past it or see it on, they may be more likely to check it out. And I think that that is one thing that we are seeing as women's sports are taking up more space in media, which is amazing.
Hmm.
And it's just easier to find that you will see people not only seek it out and have a better time finding it, but accidentally stumbling on it and staying with it too.
Can you tell us a little bit more about UPSL? I know that there's a really big focus on player development and giving these athletes more of a holistic career, right? While they're playing soccer, after their soccer career may be over. Can you tell us a little bit more about the league itself and what it's going to provide for the players?
Yeah, so Um, there are 35,000 elite female soccer players in the United States, and currently 750 top flight professional roster spots. Oftentimes, when we have a conversation about whether there is space for WPSL Pro, that's the number I go back to. We, as a country, our U.S. women's national team has won more titles than the world combined. We consistently develop world class talent and we don't give them opportunities to develop. On the women's side, there are 23 professional teams. On the men's side, there were over 100. And it's
Well,
no disrespect to men's soccer. Let's just say US men's soccer doesn't
yeah,
perform
I
on the
think it's
level of
men's
women's.
versus women's sports in general.
It's much less about comparing the two, but more so a way to highlight the distance between them and that in spite of those obstacles, women are still performing above what we would expect them to with the
Hmm.
level of support they get. So on the women's side, as I mentioned, NWSL is Division 1. There's nothing at Division 2, nothing at Division 3, and then amateur. So your options as a female soccer player in the United States are make it to the best soccer league in the world, or pay for yourself to go to Europe to get a contract, or get a day job and hope for the best. And we don't do that to men. We offer countless pathways and a lot more opportunities. And there's no reason to have that gap because we see not only the level of talent that happens here, but growing opportunities for leagues to be sustainable and profitable, for teams to be sustainable and profitable. So when I became part of WPSL Pro, I signed a letter of intent during our NWSL campaign. So during that campaign, a competing league, USL Super League, launched, and they launched without a draft.
Hmm.
And WSL, had a college draft, like a lot of other professional sports. But not having a draft gives players more agency, gives them more choices to choose where they start their career. And what I love most about it is that it requires teams to have a value proposition. You can't just show up and say, "You're mine, too bad."
Hmm.
But you have to really think about what you're offering, why your market is valuable, why your team is where someone wants to play. And so I started thinking during that time, if we get the team, how are we going to present Cleveland as where you want to start your career and stay?
Hmm.
So we started building partnerships with we're home to Cleveland Clinic and other medical partners who provide not only world class sports medicine, but we have a number of women's health specific providers. We have a lot of partners who wanted to work with us, especially like women led and women owned financial services and banks, to help women understand how, especially young women, understand how to save, how to plan for retirement, how to invest, how to plan for a life after their playing career, because no one's retiring from professional soccer at 70 with a fat IRA. And we wanted to think about that holistic experience of starting your career and running through your career. We also, as a league, are considering ways that we can provide personal and professional development. So all of these things are, really thinking about the athlete as a human being, which
Hmm.
too often we don't do. Even if when athletes are being paid top dollar, they're not always being considered a human being. They're
Yeah.
a commodity. And
Hmm.
I think that there are opportunities to, especially when, a league is emerging or nascent, or any league, I think creating an experience where someone can earn a livable wage and develop what their career skills are going to need to be after they retire, them for compensate veteran players for like their experience on the field and what they can bring to the locker room. So really thinking about holistically, how do we treat these people as human beings, understand what
Hmm.
their goals are, and help them work toward them. And so WPSL Pro not only is being shaped with that in mind, but it's also being shaped with the teams in mind. So one of the obstacles that we faced when we didn't get the NWSL team is that subsequent teams would go for significantly more. In 2020, and I apologize if I don't get all of these numbers perfect, but in 2020, the franchise fee for an NWSL team was $2 million. By 2022, it had gone up to 50 or
Oh, wow.
53. And when Denver got it, they paid $110 million. Atlanta paid $160 million. You can see the direction this is going. And
Yeah.
Columbus is very likely to get the next one. And it'll probably be well over $200 million. So that is beginning to cut out a lot of markets that
Hmm.
may not have a patron saint billionaire.
Yeah.
And I don't think that women's professional soccer requires that. You do need substantial capital to be a responsible business owner and be able to have training facilities and a place to play and to pay your players. But the barrier to entry shouldn't be that huge fee. It's not my place to say, but if you are paying $200 million for a team, you should be paying your players significantly more.
Yeah, that's very true. Have you, you mentioned all the ways that you can support the women players. Have you talked to other teams or kind of compared notes with others of how you guys as a league with the various different teams within the league to support women kind of at the same level?
What we started building was based on a number of conversations. First with players. So
Hmm.
it was current, recent, almost players, and even college players, talking to them about what it looks like to, what, again, that value proposition looks like
Hmm.
right now as we are onboarding founding teams. That's something that is part of the conversation. What does it look like to support players? How are you showing up for players? But also, what do you need as a team to have a sustainable business to create that? It's one
Hmm.
thing to say, you know, we offer these benefits or provide in this way, but what we are trying to do, because we absolutely have the luxury of starting from scratch. We are building the business model not only at the league level but at the team level so that we can support that vision for what this league can be near term and long term. When we think about, it's one thing to say let's pay these players X amount, but then where does that money come from? So
Hmm.
we want to make sure that that's worked in from the beginning, and that it's not just a requirement, but something we are helping teams understand how to do, and how we can all learn from one another to continue to improve the league and continue to make money year over year, so that everyone can gain value in whatever ways is meaningful for them.
Yeah, that's great. And you talked about the value proposition for the players. When you're talking about external marketing, is there a difference between how you would market externally a men's team versus a women's team? Are there big differences in how you would approach that?
I think one of the things that we've seen, especially over the past, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years, is that women's sports fans are drawn so strongly to the individual players. We absolutely see that on the men's side, but I think you more consistently see that on the men's side with the stars. You have,
Hmm.
a few stars, and that's what's, where you see that individual fandom. On the women's side, I think that all of the players who are willing to have a story are a part of building the credibility, the legitimacy, the power of a team or a league. And
Hmm.
that's what, when we go to market with the league or with a team, we want to be able, it's not just about, how great the player is or what they look like or, any of those things. It's, what
Hmm.
kind of story do they have? Are they a relatable person? Are they, interesting? We want to be able to show like, the real humans behind this league and this team. And I think that seems to be kind of like the ethos of this. It's like just go back to the humans. It's really think about, who the people are who, make this thing worth being a generational, fandom. I,
Hmm.
I think ultimately what we want to create is something that, people pass to their kids or their friends or their parents.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the key differences. And there's so much community driven growth that you'll see on the women's side. Getting together to watch sports is certainly not unique to women's sports, but the places and the ways we come together around women's sports, are different than men as well. And so, that's what we'll be leaning into, at the team level in Cleveland. We have, a number of locations like the women's sports bar or,
Hmm.
other places that might be more, I say family friendly, and I feel like too often the assumption is that, family friendly means you have to have kids. I think that family friendly means there aren't jerks there.
Yeah.
So,
It's a welcoming place to be where everyone
right.
just is there to have fun.
Right. And I think that that's one of the other elements of women's sports. You're a sports fan, and I'm sure in your life you encountered someone who, when you said, I'm a fan of X team or X sport, your knowledge was tested. Well, name five players or,
Yeah.
give me these stats, qualify yourself or validate yourself.
Hmm.
And you don't get that in women's sports. I think that it's a very welcoming space physically and industry wide. No one will ever ask you to name five teams or 10 players or, any stats. And I think most teams and leagues will welcome you equally, whether you've been a fan since you were in the womb or 5 minutes from now. And I think that that is also the reason why women's sports will continue to grow and build momentum and will kind of compress the amount of time it takes to grow and have be more of a norm alongside men's sports.
Yeah. And I think that's totally true. Even doing a podcast on sports, I feel, I mean, maybe it's just me and maybe it's the culture, but I do find myself having to kind of validate my knowledge, right? Like all of these facts and things that you have to spit out to, again, just show that you know what you're talking about. And so I can totally relate to that. And I'm sure that social media is going to help you a lot when you're telling these stories. As you know, I'm a huge golf fan, and I watch these players on tour every week, and I do relate to the ones that I see more on social media and their families and their significant others, and you see them out there just doing everyday things. And to your point, I think seeing that human side and the other side of them definitely helps draw in more people. And I wish that, well, golf is a little bit more of a reserved sport, so I understand that golfers aren't out there yet in terms of just being their own personalities, but that's one of the things I wish we would see more in golf too, more of the personalities. Are there marketing trends or things that you've seen with other women's sports leagues like WNBA, LPGA that you're kind of taking into the soccer world that have been successful?
So I think, you were just talking about, interestingly, I feel like LPGA, I think, is a great example and an early example of really telling that, telling the individual story of athletes. I didn't grow up with golf, but I know who Anna Sorenstrom is. I know
Mhm.
Michelle Wie, and Michelle Wie is actually, I mean, granted, I think she's about 10 years younger than I am, but I remember growing up, and my story is always, I tell people, my when I was growing up, my dad always wanted me to be a tennis player, and he'd always it's funny growing up with a parent who's a professional athlete because they don't think of becoming a professional athlete as like a pipe dream. So my dad was always kind of pushing tennis on me, and I played tennis for a while, but I didn't love it. I do love watching it, but I didn't love
Mhm.
playing it. And I didn't think about what he was saying to me at the time because I didn't listen to anything, adults said to me when I was a teenager. But I didn't listen to what he said, and it didn't make sense to me until recently. We actually talked about it, that he always wanted me to play tennis because he felt like even in the 80s it was the most equitable sport.
Mhm.
And I I was a great swimmer. I played a lot of sports. When I looked at professional leagues or at professional options for me, I just looked at the world and said, well, I just got to play as well as the men. Like that was it.
Mhm.
And when you had like someone like Michelle Wie who would enter tournaments,
Mhm.
and however it turned out, it was like you were still seeing a woman who at that time was, at least, even if she didn't make whatever cut she needed to, she was still daring to do it.
Mhm.
And I think that it's just, I think at that time it was, and still, like, we're still trying to figure out how to organize sports. But I think that with golf in particular, like having stories like that, telling the stories of the athletes and not just reporting their stats, but
Mhm.
how they were different or how they were human. I think women's golf has done well. because someone like me actually knows who some people are.
In terms of the fan experience, when you guys have the stadium built and whatnot, when fans kind of come into the stadium for the first time, what do you envision as that experience with all these, thousands of people walking into the stadium? What do you envision that fan experience to be when they step in?
So, creating a unique and really high quality fan experience is one of our top priorities. We already started actually last year doing regular surveys to just understand what people are looking for, from what seats are like, to what food is like, to what brands you want to see there. And I think, it will always start with the fans for us. We just had a really great launch of our men's brand for a city, Cleveland, and the response was phenomenal. And I talked to people, and they said, were you surprised? And not this isn't a pompous response, but no, because we talked to 3,000 people about it. And yes, there could have absolutely been a different response, but we had so many conversations and so much validation for the direction we were going, and tweaks along the way, that, building around the people who are saying, I'm going to be there, I'm going to be your lifelong fan. You're not always going to create the game day experience or the brand or whatever that makes everyone happy. In fact, if a few people hate it, then, if a few people don't hate it, I should say, you've done it all wrong. But that game will be the first ever women's professional soccer game in the state of Ohio. As we talked about earlier, Cleveland is a great town for sports. We have very high performing teams, and I don't necessarily mean the teams on the field, court, diamond, but the
Hmm.
teams who put the game days together, like, we will have to compete as a product, not necessarily head to head, but as an experience with the Cavs. Go to a Cavs game, and there's not a single part of the experience that you're like, oh, well, where was this? I'm wanting for
Hmm.
something. Every everything is thought of, and we won't necessarily be able to start on that note, but we will, develop and improve. We really want to focus on, having really great energy, having a welcoming space. The thing that really warms my heart, always makes a soccer game just like unlike any other experience. At the beginning of a soccer match, you very traditionally sing a song that
Hmm.
is, the team song, and it's one of the most beautiful moments. If you've never been, I recommend to anybody to go to a soccer game, even if you don't like. I'm not a Columbus Crew fan, for instance, and I went to a Columbus Crew match, and they started singing together at the beginning. I'm just like sobbing because
It's a
it's one
moment.
of it's and it's like it's that moment that everyone is together. Like, even,
Yeah.
even the other team's fans are there, and there's still that
Hmm.
moment. They're probably not singing, but you're still standing in a space where everyone is together for the same reason. And even if the match gets a little testy later, like, you've still had this moment where we all come together, and we're all, just it's a feeling unlike any other. I just can't even spit out the words about what the feeling is.
Well, you kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask you, if someone has never watched soccer before and they asked you, what am I missing? I think you just answered it. That camaraderie and that feeling. It's kind of the feeling that I get anytime I go to any game and I hear the national anthem, right? It's that
Mhm.
moment that kind of bonds everyone together, no matter where you're from, what team you're supporting. So I think it's kind of that same feeling that you get. You mentioned the launch of the men's team. I think it was last week for City Cleveland. When can we anticipate the women's team being announced?
May 4th. And it's when we set the dates, um, I didn't anticipate how long it would feel between two. So we
You're
launched
like, we have all this momentum and we want to go now.
and it's so funny. It's just kind of like when you have a secret, you tell. If you have a couple of secrets, you tell the first one, and, especially when people respond with so much love, and support, and it's just like, well, I want to give you this next one too.
Hmm.
And when deciding, we had initially decided to launch both at the same time. Both brands were supposed to launch on March 10th. But then, with just input from people who know far more than I do, they were
Hmm.
like, don't do it. Give them both time to breathe, give them their own stage,
Yeah.
give the fans a chance to digest. And so it was we announced the men's team, as I mentioned, in November of 2022, and we're also in the St. Patrick's Day parade. So it's a green, like the primary color of it is green.
Hmm.
When thinking, I'm like, well, the fans that we have for the men's team have waited a
Yeah.
long time. And it'll be a lot easier to do this if it's green. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily the soundest logic, but it worked out well. And I immediately, obviously the build up to that launch was a lot, but it felt really great to just kind of turn around the next day and say, all right, got my I got my
Yeah.
women's team to work toward. It will be a very, I think it'll be a different experience, but hopefully equally as satisfying on my end.
Well, I'll definitely keep an eye out for it. It was exciting to see all of the promotion and social media and stuff around Forest Cities. So as we begin to wrap up here, when you think about 5 years from now, 10 to 15 years from now, what does success look like for you and your team?
So we've said a number of times that Cleveland is a big sports town. Success for me is, I feel like when you're out in public within eyeshot, there's always at least one sports shirt. It might be a
Hmm.
jersey, or I should say, piece of merch. There's, someone's wearing a hat or a jacket or something. Success to me means regularly seeing women's sports something on people. It doesn't even necessarily have
Hmm.
to be my team, but I think that with introducing this team, the incoming WNBA team, any other teams that end up standing up in this region, I think that I want it to become a norm that as frequently as you see other men's sports on people's bodies, that people will as regularly and proudly wear women's sports.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I have made it a goal of mine to go check out a San Diego Wave game this season. So I'm very excited for that. But Gina, I want to thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. A lot of great insights and definitely looking forward to seeing what you and the team do in the future. We'll be keeping a close eye out. So thank you very much for joining us today.
And thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for letting me talk about soccer when you talk about
Hope more
golf.
people
And
talk about soccer.